Oh, there's something in my chest that I can't hide. When feelings get involved, I'm terrified. 'Cause I've been here before and said goodbye. Oh, are you the one when I try to look, I wish I'd find? Oh, how can I love when I've been hurt 100 times? For you, I'd give it one more try. Turn away and wrestle with my doubts. Oh, I leave them all behind, but don't know how. Bury my head deep within the crowd, but I'm reaching for your hand to pull me out. Oh, are you the one when I try to look, I wish I'd find? Oh, how can I love when I've been hurt 100 times? You can see straight through my life.
All right. Good evening, everybody. It is time. Oh, wait. I'm jumping ahead of myself. I'm not ready to start yet. What's wrong with me? I'll be right back. Duh. I'm not ready. Right back. Pause. Okay, there we go. Now I's ready. Oh, yeah, thank you. Okay, so Revan, chapters 6 and 7. So they're short chapters, so easy enough to get through 2 in a night. So here we go. A week had passed since the mission on Halion. Daily doses of Colto had healed Scourge's wounds. Even his cracked ribs were fully mended, but his pride and confidence were still wounded. The mission had been a success, but things had gone a lot less smoothly than he would have liked. No doubt Sechel's report to Nyrus would paint each of his mistakes in the most garish tone. He was desperate to find some way to vent his frustrations, and today he had finally felt well enough to visit the Stronghold's exercise yard for a much-needed workout. He rarely went more than 2 or 3 days without practicing his drills, knowing that his continued survival would often depend on his martial expertise. Though there were others in the yard, none was a worthy sparring partner. He would gain little from testing himself against any of Murtagh's soldiers. Even the guard captain himself wouldn't present any real challenge to a fully trained Sith Lord. Sure is arrogant for as much as he got his butt kicked over in there. I know it was hot and he was in armor, but still, he's supposed to be powerful in the Force. Anyway, instead, he performed a complex routine of drills designed to hone his reflexes, all while wearing his heavy armor. His crimson blade hummed as he cycled through the aggressive thrusts and cuts of Juyo, the seventh form of lightsaber combat. The weapon moved so fast that it was nothing but a blur, but each strike was precise and controlled. In the middle of his routine, he noticed that Nyrus's young Twi'lek slave had entered the yard. She stood patiently off to one side, her head bowed respectfully. Scourge put an abrupt end to the session, knowing she would be here only if Nyrus had sent her. He flicked his lightsaber off and clipped it to his belt before crossing the yard to her. "Darth Nyrus wishes to speak to you," the Twi'lek said softly, keeping her eyes focused on the ground. "Will Seshel be there?" he demanded. "I do not know, my lord," she replied. Scourge frowned. He had not seen or spoken with Seshel since their return. "Take me to Nyrus." The slave nodded, then turned and set off. Scourge fell into step behind her. He'd sought Seshel out several times over the past week, but the aide always seemed to be off on some task or assignment. It could have been coincidence, but it was also possible Seshel was avoiding him. If that was the case, Scourge might know why. During his recovery, he'd had plenty of time to think back on the mission. Rehashing it in his head had brought several inconsistencies to light, things Seshel might not want to discuss with Scourge face to face. The slave was leading him through the east wing of the stronghold. She was moving quickly ahead of him, but with his long legs, Scourge had little trouble keeping up. As he walked, he continued to mull over the issue of Seshel. At the time, he'd credited the aide with saving his life by shutting down the manufacturing plant's power grid and disabling the security guard droids. Now he wondered if that had been an accident. The more he thought about it, the more the evidence seemed to indicate that Seshel hadn't wanted him to survive the mission. Seshel had obviously needed Scourge's help to get past the drones and the fence outside the plant, and he'd needed Scourge to help hold off security long enough for him to slice into UDM's computer network. But after that, Scourge became expendable. Once the droids were deactivated, Seshel no longer needed the Sith Lord to protect him. What at first sounded like a paranoid fantasy became more and more plausible as Scourge recalled specific details of the mission. He had no way of knowing how long it had taken Seshel to slice into the network, but he'd likely found the files he was looking for in the first few minutes. Looking back, it seemed as if he could have shut down the power grid much sooner than he had. What if Seshel had waited as long as possible before deactivating the droids, hoping they would have enough time to kill Scourge? From the records room, Seshel couldn't have seen what was happening out on the manufacturing floor. He'd probably assumed Scourge was already dead by the time he shut everything down. That would also explain why Seshel hadn't bothered to contact him with a warning that the plant was about to explode. He'd only mentioned the reactors because Scourge called him on the holocom after everything went dark. If Scourge hadn't initiated the holocall, Seshel might have slipped away in the darkness alone. Seshel's early assurances that UDM didn't have assault droids were also suspect. The units Scourge had encountered could have been experimental prototypes, as Seshel had claimed, but it is also possible he'd known about them all along and hadn't said anything, hoping Scourge would be caught off guard by their arrival. 3 pieces of circumstantial evidence: a possible delay in shutting down the droids, Seshel not contacting him to warn him about the impending explosion, and the unexpected presence of the assault droids, weren't enough for Scourge to be certain of anything. Yet the fact that Seshel now seemed to be avoiding him further strengthened the Sith Lord's desire to question him in a very long, very private session. Unfortunately, that talk would have to wait. Seshel still enjoyed Nyrus's protection, and Scourge wasn't willing to risk the Dark Counselor's wrath by interrogating him. Not yet, at least. They had reached the door to Nyrus's private chamber. Scourge briefly considered whether he should say something about his suspicion to her, then decided against it. Seshel was an expert at political maneuvering. If he was guilty, involving Nyrus would only work in the advisor's favor. Better to confront him directly when the time was right. The Twi'lek slave knocked lightly on the door, and Nyrus's voice called out, "Enter!" from the other side. Once again, Nyrus sat at the computer console in the center of the room. As she rose from her chair and turned to face Scourge, the slave closed the door, sealing the three of them alone in the room. "I was given word you have recovered from your injuries," Nyrus said. "Nothing serious, my lord," Scourge replied. "You seem to have a habit of getting wounded in my service." "I was surprised by the assault droids." "And I'm surprised they gave you so much trouble." Scourge remained silent. Nyrus stretched her dry, cracked lips into an unsettling grin that seemed to fill the entire lower half of her wrinkled face. Scourge endured the rictus without comment until it mercifully faded. "I find it odd that someone with your reputation would be hard-pressed to defeat a single assault droid and a few patrol drones, yet you dispatched my mercenaries with ease." It was obvious she was getting at something, but Scourge had no idea what it might be. I don't understand," he finally admitted. "No, you don't," she agreed, briefly flashing another disconcerting smile. "Recite the Sith code for me," she instructed, sounding like one of the trainers at the academy. "Peace is a lie. There is only passion. Through passion I gain strength." The words came easily to Scourge. The mantra had been drilled into his brain during his training until it was second nature. "Through strength I gain power. Through power I gain victory. Through victory my chains are broken." "You know the words, but you do not truly understand them," Nyrus admonished. "The dark side draws on the most powerful emotions: anger, hatred, fear. We are taught to use our emotions to unlock our true potential and unleash the force against our enemies." Scourge pushed down the impatience threatening to rise within him. She was saying nothing he hadn't heard countless times during his apprenticeship, but she must have a reason he wasn't yet seeing. "The Force runs through every living being," she went on. "When we fight an opponent of flesh and blood, we draw on their emotions as well. All who follow the dark side instinctively do this on some level. It is so instinctive that most instructors feel it does not need to be taught." She paused, and again he wondered where she was going with all this. "I have studied your records from the academy and observed your battle with the mercenaries in my courtyard," she said at last. "You have a special gift. You do not just feed on the raw emotions of your foe. You gorge yourself on them. You feast on their primal fear. It amplifies your hate and anger. It fuels the power of the Force. It transforms you into an instrument of death and destruction." Scourge nodded. Battling a living foe was intoxicating. With each attack and counter he felt a rush of heat coursing through his veins, energizing and empowering him, yet he had felt almost none of that at the UDM plant. "When I fought the security droid, there was nothing to grab on it. It was cold, empty." "Precisely. You tried to feed off its non-existent emotions, and in doing so only made yourself weaker. I wonder that this wasn't observed in you. Even the most powerful gift needs guiding to be used effectively." She shook her head. "You are so used to using your gift that you neglect the most basic source of power, yourself. The next time you find yourself in a similar situation, you must turn your focus inward. Draw on your own emotions, and you will destroy your mechanical enemies as readily as you slaughter your organic ones." Scourge nodded. He did not like being lectured, but her observation was a good one. He realized that he had indeed learned to rely on the emotions of his enemies to feed his power, and he had not seen that such a gift could also be a weakness, but one that, with time and practice, could be overcome. A valuable lesson, my lord, one I will take to heart. I have enough sycophants working for me, she answered, brushing off his gratitude. But none can do what I do, Scourge reminded her. Nyra spread her lips into another gruesome smile, and Scourge resisted the urge to shudder as a chill crawled down his spine. I hope your restored confidence will serve you well on your next mission, she said. The file Cecil recovered from UDM proved quite fruitful. He traced the payment for the custom droid sent to assassinate me back to a group of radical human separatists from Bostherda dedicated to freeing their world from the tyranny of the Empire and the Dark Council. Heavy sarcasm dripped from her voice, and Scourge shared her contempt. There were some enemies he could respect. There were some causes he could understand, even if he fought against them. This was not one of them. There were recently conquered worlds that suffered under the Empire's yoke. Planets like Halion, where rebellion was to be expected. But Bostherda had been part of the Empire for hundreds of years. Its people were full citizens, with all the rights and privileges of those on Droman Kaas. Human separatist propaganda might cry out against unfair treatment of their species, but Scourge knew their claims were unfounded. The original Dark Jedi who had taught the Sith tribes the ways of the Force millennia ago had been human, and though their bloodlines had been absorbed into the Sith aristocracy long ago, humans still made up the vast majority of the Imperial population. There were human slaves, of course, but these were individuals born into the lower ranks of society, or those who had fallen through their own failures and weakness. Unlike other lesser species, they were not persecuted or discriminated against in any real way. There were no laws limiting their movements, no restrictions on what rank or position they could hold. Humans could rise to the highest ranks of the Imperial military. A number of worlds were even ruled by wealthy and powerful human families, and the Emperor had appointed many humans to serve on the Dark Council. Of the 12 current members, 5 were human, including Darth Zedrix, the counselor with the longest active service. Humans had no right or reason to complain about their status in the Empire. The Separatists were nothing but ungrateful scum and traitors. Why did they target you? Scourge wondered aloud. Why not strike at the Emperor himself? The Emperor is too well protected, Nyra said. Since they cannot get to him, one of the longest-serving members of the Dark Council is the next best thing. And they would never strike at Darth Zedrix, she added. He is human. They probably consider him one of their own. What about Darth Igrol? Scourge asked. He is Sith, and he has served longer than anyone except Darth Zedrix. Igrol resides on Droman Fells. Killing one of the Dark Council on Droman Kaas, the Imperial capital, makes more of a statement. She paused. They may also have chosen me because of my history with Darth Zedrix. Ever since I joined the Dark Council, there has been animosity between us. At the time, he was one of the most powerful members, yet even from the start, he sensed my potential and feared it. For decades, he has schemed against me, but I have outmaneuvered him every time, slowly building up my allies and influence while his have dwindled away. Nyra wasn't telling Scourge anything new. It was common knowledge that members of the Dark Council typically viewed one another as dangerous rivals, and there were always rumors of shadowy feuds being fought behind the scenes. Scourge believed the Emperor actually encouraged the infighting, since it dissuaded the various members from uniting their resources against him. Despite what Nyra claimed, however, her rivalry with Darth Zedrix had been anything but one-sided. Both had seen their fortunes rise and fall and rise again, with neither able to gain enough of an upper hand to eliminate the other. Somehow Scourge didn't think it would be prudent to mention this. The Separatists probably see my rivalry with Darth Zedrix as proof I dislike all humans. Untrue, of course, but a well-crafted lie will often serve where truth will not. Oh, that sounds so familiar. Her logic was sound, but the reasons hardly mattered. The Separatists had tried to kill a member of the Dark Council. There had to be retribution. I will find these traitors and eviscerate them, he declared. They've already been found. Sechel was able to use the information he acquired at UDM to locate their base on the mountains of Bostherda. If they heard about the destruction of the UDM plant, they may be suspicious. We must strike quickly before they can move to a new location. My people are leaving for Bostherda tonight. You will accompany them. You're sending Sechel and me again? Nyrus nodded. They may have connections to other terrorist groups. Sechel will be able to slice their records and find out who they're working with. I'm also sending Murtaugh and his soldiers with you. Sechel will be your precision instrument. The soldiers will be your blunt tool. Scourge would have preferred to leave Sechel behind, at least until he had a chance to confirm his suspicions. He briefly considered sharing his concern with Nyrus, then decided to stick with his original plan of keeping them to himself. He'd just have to keep a close eye on Sechel during the mission, and be wary of walking into any traps. There would be plenty of time to deal with him once the Separatists were eliminated, and he'd proven himself worthy in Darth Nyrus's eyes. The human filth will die, my lord, Scourge promised, bowing low. I will not fail. That's the end of Chapter 6, jumping right into Chapter 7. For the second time in the space of a single month, Revan found himself at a table in the back of the dealer's den, surrounded by the dregs of Coruscant. You couldn't have just contacted me via holocom? He asked Canderous as he took a seat. T3 obediently rolled underneath the table to sit patiently at their feet, safely away from where the waitresses might trip over him. I need to talk to you face to face about this, the Mandalorian replied. Sounds ominous. T3 chirped his agreement. You still having those nightmares? Canderous asked. Sometimes. I'm dealing with it. The dreams were coming only 2 or 3 times a week now, instead of every night. Revan didn't know if this was because his subconscious was gaining more control over the repressed memory, or if it had something to do with the fact that he was taking steps to investigate his vision. Whatever the explanation, over the past week he had finally been able to grab a few nights of fitful rest. It wasn't enough to get rid of the dark circles under his eyes, but he no longer felt utterly exhausted. Tell me what you found, he said. I didn't learn anything about the planet covered in storms and eternal night, but I did dig up something you might be interested in. The astromech droid at Revan's feet beeped twice. It was obvious even to him that Canderous was hesitant to speak. I hope you're not waiting for me to try to buy this information from you, Revan joked. I left most of my credits at home. Canderous shifted uncomfortably, then leaned forward to speak in a low whisper. I probably shouldn't be telling you this, you being a Jedi and all, but I think you have a right to know. If you're worried I'll go running to the Council with your secret, don't be. It's not just them. You can't tell the Galactic Senate either. Whatever you got to say must be pretty bad, Revan remarked. Depends on your point of view. The big man leaned back in his chair and took a deep breath. Revan stayed silent, giving his friend time to gather himself. I got in contact with some of my people, just like you asked, Canderous said finally. I found out that dozens of the strongest chiefs are gathering their clans at Rekiad. Revan recognized the name. Located in the outer rim system of the same name, Rekiad was a virtually uninhabited world of ice and snow. They're planning another invasion, he guessed, assuming that was why Canderous was worried about the Jedi or the Republic finding out. No, they're not, Canderous assured him. Not yet, at least. They're searching for Mandalore's mask. They think you hid it somewhere on Rekiad. An image flickered through Revan's mind. He and Malak standing on the top of a glacier, surrounded by a swirling blizzard. It vanished before he could grasp it, retreating into the dark corners of his subconscious. Yet the brief flash of the resurfacing memory was enough to confirm what Canderous had said. I think they might be right, Revan muttered. Canderous was silent. obviously expecting him to say more, but there wasn't anything he could add. The memory was gone. You know what the mask means to my people, Canderous said. Without it, we are lost. Vagabonds, wandering the galaxy without a purpose. Recovering the mask would be the key to restoring Mandalorian honor and power. Revan knew all of this. That was why he had hidden the mask after slaying Mandalore the Ultimate, a final act to demoralize a defeated foe. He'd hoped it would take the Mandalorians generations to recover from the loss of their most revered cultural symbol. Without it, the warlike clans would be too busy fighting among themselves for power to even think about conquering Republic worlds. But if the mask were to be found again, whoever finds it will be hailed as the new leader of the clans, Canderous continued. Mandalore will rise again, and the Mandalorians will follow. Revan knew that Canderous was sharing this knowledge with him out of loyalty. They had been through too many battles together for him to keep this secret. Yet he also understood why Canderous had been reluctant to speak. He was still a Mandalorian, and he feared for the future of his people. The wounds of the Mandalorian Wars were still fresh in the minds of the Jedi and the Republic. The looming specter of the Mandalorian army, unified by a single warlike leader, would not be ignored. Even if the Jedi Council refused to take action again, the Senate would send its fleets to crush the potential threat before it could begin. In their disorganized and depleted state, it was unlikely the Mandalorians would be able to resist. After the inevitable defeat, the Senate would likely impose martial law over the surviving clans, forcing them to disarm and abandon the customs and practices of their warrior culture. If the Republic found out about this, the Mandalorians, as Canderous knew them, would cease to exist forever. Do you believe the Mandalorians will attack the Republic again if the mask is found? Revan asked. Depends on who finds it, Canderous answered candidly. Some of the clan leaders want nothing more than to avenge our defeat. Others would rather try to rebuild our society. We were great warriors before we started conquering Republic worlds. It's possible we can restore our honor without violating the treaty terms we agreed to. The terms I forced you to accept, Revan thought. It was ironic that Canderous was sharing all of this with the architect of the Mandalorians' greatest defeat. Almost a decade earlier, Revan had been one of the few willing to take action against the invading clans. But he was not the same person he was back then. He no longer clung to the simplistic ideals of right and wrong or good and evil. He understood better than anyone that dark and light were intertwined in strange and complex ways, and on some primal level he knew this was all somehow connected to his visions of a dark, storm-swept world. The Mandalorians had the potential to be a very real threat, but his visions had convinced him there was something far more dangerous lurking beyond the borders of known space. The fate of the entire galaxy might rest on the repressed memories trying to break free from the prison of his own mind, and sending a hostile Republic fleet to scatter the clans wouldn't get him any closer to unlocking the truth. I'm not going to say anything about this to the Senate or the Council, Revan assured his friend, but whoever finds the Mandalore's mask will shape the destiny of your people for the next 1,000 years. I think it might be a good idea for us to be there when that happens. A broad grin spread across Canderous' scarred, square jaw, and he reached across the table and slapped the Jedi on the shoulder. I knew I could count on you. Time to get the old gang back together for one last adventure. Not everyone, Revan countered. Juhani and Jolee are Jedi. They still answer to the Council. They might feel obligated to say something about this. I got no problem with leaving the cat girl and the old man behind. I don't want to get Mission and Zalbar mixed up in this either, Revan continued. They've worked hard to build up a nice import-export business over the past year. I don't want them to throw it all away. They would if you asked them to, Canderous noted. Wouldn't even think twice about it. That's why I'm not going to ask. Mission's had it rough her whole life. Now that she's finally got it back on track, I'm not going to mess things up for her. Okay, scratch the Twi'lek kid. But what about Zalbar? That Wookiee knows how to handle himself when things get rough. Mission and Big Z are a team. We can't break them up. Canderous rolled his eyes. We're getting a little short on bodies here. T3 whistled loudly, and Revan reached down to give him a reassuring pat on the head. Don't worry, little fellow. You're too useful to leave behind. The astromech droid whistled again. Good point, Revan replied. HK is a little too trigger-happy to bring on this mission. Things tend to get bloody when he's around. You realize we're going to a planet overrun with Mandalorians, Canderous reminded him. Bloody is probably unavoidable. I'm hoping at least some of the clans can be reasoned with, Revan explained. If we bring a homicidal assassin droid with us, I don't think they're going to give us much of a chance to explain why we're there. We're a little short on bodies, Canderous repeated. What about that other Jedi who helped you during the war? Not Malak, the one they call the Exile. Mitra? Revan said. I heard she and the Council had a falling out. I don't know where she is. Might be worth tracking her down, Canderous pressed. She proved herself during the war. Revan wasn't sure how much Canderous knew about Malachor 5 and the mass shadow generator. The mission report was sealed away in the Jedi archives. He might have no idea that she had lured thousands of his fellow soldiers into a trap. It was also possible he was fully aware of Mitra's actions and respected her even more for making the ruthless but tactically brilliant decision to sacrifice thousands of her own people to achieve victory. In either case, Revan didn't want to get into the tragic tale of Mitra's banishment and her severance from the Force. She may have had a falling out with the Council, but she's still a Jedi, he lied, doing his best to ignore the twinge of guilt he felt for his role in her ultimate fate. So who's that leave then? You, me, and this half-sized bucket of bolts? Canderous gave T3 a playful kick with one of his heavy boots. The droid beeped angrily in response. Don't forget Bastia. Or Bastila. It's only one L, so I don't know. Revan added, I thought you wanted to leave the Jedi out of this. She's my wife, Revan answered. I'm not going to abandon her. Hey, it's your call, Canderous said, holding his hands up defensively. She's welcome to come along. I mean, if you really think you can convince her that heading to the Outer Rim to explore Rekied's frozen wastelands is a good idea. Well, Revan said with a shrug, we never did go on a honeymoon. Bastia was sitting in the living room when he got home, watching holovids while she waited for him to return. Revan wondered if she'd been waiting long. He hadn't told her where he was going, and he hadn't told her about sending Canderous off to investigate the Mandalorians. He just hadn't seen any point in worrying her if there was nothing she could do to help. Now that they had a plan, however, he was eager to share it with her. He just had to be careful how he explained it all. Sorry, he said as he crossed the room and bent down to give her a kiss. I didn't know I'd be so late. You shouldn't have waited up. That's okay, she said, taking his hand and pulling him down onto the couch beside her. I couldn't sleep. Still holding his hand, she turned to face him. I've got something to tell you, she said. Me too, big news. I bet mine's bigger, she said with a faint smile. That's a bet you'd lose, he warned her. I'm pregnant. Revan was stunned into silence for several long seconds. When he finally managed to speak, all he could say was, okay, you win. Revan couldn't believe he hadn't noticed Bastia's pregnancy earlier. Though there was no visible physical signs of her condition, it should have been obvious. The instant she'd told him, he'd clearly sensed the life growing inside her through the Force. I must be getting senile in my old age, he said, caressing her still flat belly. You've had a lot on your mind, Bastia reminded him, and you haven't been sleeping much. It was still too early to tell if it was a boy or a girl, but it didn't matter to Revan either way. He and Bastia were going to have a child. It was the happiest day of his life. There was just one small problem. Talk about bad timing, Bastia murmured, echoing his own sentiments. Once he'd gotten over the joyful shocks of her news, he'd told her about his meeting with Canderous. I have to do this, he said softly. It's the only way I'm ever going to find out what that vision actually means. What if you don't find out? Bastia countered. Your nightmares are fading. Maybe in a few months they'll stop. Maybe, he agreed, though he didn't believe it. But I think there are more than just old memories bubbling up. They're a warning. Even if the visions stopped, the threat they represent would still be out there. Haven't you done enough already? Bastia asked, her voice rising slightly. You saved the Republic from the Mandalorians. You saved the Republic from Malak. And in return, you had your identity destroyed and you were ostracized by the Council. She pulled away from him, her anger building. You don't owe them anything anymore, she insisted. You've paid for your mistakes. You've sacrificed enough. You've earned the right to live out your days in peace. If I don't do something, nobody else will, he said, shaking his head. So what? So nobody does anything. Whatever evil's lurking in the unknown regions might not show itself for decades. We could both be old and gray by then. We have a chance to live out our entire lives in perfect happiness. Are you willing to risk throwing all that away? It was tempting to give in. It would be easy to pretend nothing was wrong and just live in blissful ignorance like trillions of other beings in the galaxy. There was only one problem with her argument. I'm not doing this for the Republic, he explained. I'm not doing it for you. I'm not even doing it for me. I'm doing it for our child and our child's children. We might never live to see the horrors that are coming, but they will. He tightened his arm around her. We have to protect the Republic for them. We have to risk our chance at happiness so they can have a life we might never know. Bastia didn't answer. Instead, she leaned against him, resting her head on his shoulder, and he knew she felt the same way. When do we leave? She asked after a long moment of silence. You can't come with me, Revan objected gently. What if I find something on Rekied, some clue connected to my past? What if it leads me farther into the Outer Rim, or even the unknown regions? We could be gone for months, maybe longer. Do you really want to give birth on some uninhabited world on the edges of the galaxy? And then what will we do? How are we going to care for an infant under those conditions? I won't risk the life of our child like that, and I know you won't either. Bastia reached 2 fingers up and pressed them gently against Revan's lips. If I say you're right, she whispered, will you please shut up? He nodded silently. Because I can think of better things to do on the last night before you leave than talking. Revan couldn't have agreed with her more. Bastia accompanied Revan and T3 to the spaceport. Canderous was already there, loading supplies onto the Ebon Hawk. The Ebon Hawk had served Revan well during his hunt for Darth Malak. Owned by a succession of smugglers and pirates, it was one of the fastest ships in the galaxy. It had enough room to comfortably accommodate a crew of 8, with cargo and supplies, yet a single individual could pilot it when necessary. Technically speaking, the Ebon Hawk still belonged to Davik Kang, a Teresian crime lord, but Davik wouldn't be coming to reclaim it. He was long dead, his body buried beneath the ruins of Terrace when Malak bombed the city world from orbit. Be careful out there, Bastia said. I always am, he answered with a smile, wiping a single tear from the corner of her eye. They didn't need to say anything else. They said their true goodbyes in private the previous night. Bastia's years of Jedi training had left her uncomfortable with public displays of emotion, but she stood up on her toes and planted a long, hard kiss on Revan's lips. Then she turned away and quickly left the spaceport. Canderous raised a curious eyebrow, but showed enough restraint not to ask why she wasn't coming. They finished loading the ship in silence. 20 minutes later, the Ebon Hawk took flight. And that is the end of chapter 7. So, I'm only going to do 2 chapters a night because my voice won't hold out for that long. So, that'll be that for this session. I will come back to it on Wednesday. We'll do 8 and 9, I think. Let's see, 8. Okay. Yeah. So the next 2 chapters are slightly longer, but not too bad. So we'll do 2 more chapters um, on Wednesday, and then 2 more on Friday. So I will see you all then. And let's see. Am I gonna game tonight? It's 10:30. No, I'm not. I am going to raid somebody. Let's head on over to, let's see. We've got Old World Charm, Blackwater D&D, Captain Robert, Mr. Blitzer is playing Assassin's Creed Valhalla. Let's see, what is Blackwater D&D doing? They look like they may be ending. No, they've only been going an hour and a half. They wouldn't be ending. Yeah, let's go ahead and raid them. So, bear with me. We'll head on over there. Oh, whoops. Wrong screen. There we go.
My heart is beating. I know the pieces. Which one is broken and one is weak.
You know what? I take it back. Old World Charm has fewer viewers. I'm going to raid them instead. I'd rather give the views to somebody that's got less views at the moment. All right, here we go. You over there.
These ones match some of the ones, but they kind of have their own flair to it. Which is a pretty safe assumption.